And as you'll see, I will try to elaborate on some of the things that she said and perhaps apply it to a wider perspective. Until modern times, the role and rights of women in every religion and society were largely defined and determined by men. And therefore, the legal structure established by men predominantly gave women a dependent and an inferior status. This can be seen even in Deuteronomy 29:10, where the entire community recovenants with God. Note where the women are placed. The order of the people is, you stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, the heads of your tribes, your elders and your officers, all the men of Israel. Then your little ones, your wives, the sojourner who is in your camp. It's a different category. Further, in Jewish law, both biblical and rabbinic, men were the ones who married women and divorced them. Women could not initiate marriage or a divorce. This meant that the very language and structure by which women viewed themselves, their very self-consciousness, and how they represented themselves were internalized from masculine perspectives. I think of Leah's pathetic statement when she says, "Now my husband will love me. I have given him sons." Her sense of her own value hinged on her ability to provide Jacob with sons. What a woman internalized as womanly or feminine or their proper function was a climate of opinion generated by men. It was a male decision that determined what was of value and accepted in a woman. Parenthetically, especially now, we realize that it's not in the very best interest, not in the best interest at all, that this is the case, because it actually makes men crippled. What happens is that their mothers got their fulfillment through their male children. I can testify to that. You mentioned that I was born in Pisa, and I think that was true of my mother. My mother felt that she manipulated me in a way to get satisfaction vis-a-vis her status through me. And I'm not convinced that that's the best example for even the welfare of men, that somehow men are used by women because of their status, at least through their children, to become the kind of men that ultimately is not good for them as men. And I think it reminds me of Lillian Smith's book, Killers of the Dream, Killers of the Dream, which spoke about what segregation in the South did to the men, not just to the slaves. And I think that's an important thing for us. An example of this is seen in one of the midrashim about Hannah, referring to the sota ritual in Numbers 5, which is employed for the woman suspected of adultery. This ritual became a tool for obtaining Hannah's goal. For example, I'm now quoting the Talmud. Hannah said before the Holy One, "Master of the universe, if you take note of my suffering and grant me a child, great. But if not, then you will see. I will go and seclude myself with another man in front of my husband Elkanah. And when I seclude myself, they will give me to drink the water of the sota," which is the woman suspected of adultery. "And you will not belie your Torah, for it is stated with regard to an innocent woman who drinks the sota waters, that she shall be proven innocent, and she will have a son." However, in spite of the position that society presented to women, and I think here Rabbi Kalish really showed this in such a decisive manner that no one can question it. In spite of the position that society presented to women, they still took the initiative and made a difference for the future of the Jewish people. So, albeit operating in this context of second-class status, women played a crucial and decisive role. And here, The example that Rabbi Kalish is perhaps, as she said, the most important example going into depth, analyzing the story of Esther compellingly and informatively. Esther is an example where a woman's decision is decisive for the survival of the entire community. And there are many others in both the Hebrew Bible and rabbinic literature. For example, it was Rebekah's decision and her plan that enabled Jacob to receive Isaac's blessing, and that transformed the history of Israel. And when Judah denied Tamar his son Shelah in marriage, as was her right, she took the initiative, and through her progeny with Judah, the Davidic line emerged. In fact, Judah says of Tamar, when it turns out that she was pregnant through him, and he said, let's burn her. And she comes forward. She doesn't say anything. She just presents to him, whose staff is this? Whose cord is this? This is the man. And Judah says, she's more righteous than I am, which is an amazing, amazing statement. The Egyptian midwives in Egypt saved the Jewish male children. And Deborah, the judge, enlists Barak to battle against Sisera. But Barak says, strangely, he says to Deborah, the judge, only if you go with me will I go to battle. It's the equivalent to the heads of the Joint Chiefs of Staff goes, let's say, to when Clinton was Secretary of State. Yeah, I'll go to battle, but only if you come with me, And of course, Deborah responds, I will go with you, but it will not bring you credit, because the Lord will deliver Sisera in the hands of a woman. Indeed, it is Jael who defeats Sisera. So women were judges, queens, activists, and prophets who decisively affected the history of the Jewish people. And in spite of the inferior status of women in relation to men, enormous advancement in women's status took place in the Hebrew Bible. For example, women were put on an equal footing with men on the Sabbath, the one day a week during which every human being was and is in control of his or her time. Let's not minimize the importance of the Sabbath. Herman Cohn says very well, he says the Sabbath was made for the slave. The idea that every human being, even animals, one day a week could not be made an object. They were a subject. And it was this, it seems to me, that is so critical and so important. And here I think there are two things that we have to recognize. What were the fundamental foundations in the Bible that laid the foundation for the possibility of bringing about this change and betterment for women? First, I would say, is the significance of monotheism for the foundation of human rights. And here I'm very much in agreement with what Professor Al-Hibri has quite clearly, and I think also Dr. Murillo, quite clearly presented. That is, it is generally understood that the affirmation of a spiritual creator God who transcends and creates the world as an organized whole functioning with order and purpose, and who creates human beings, both male and female, as spiritual beings created in and for the divine image, is the foundation for the dignity and sanctity of all human beings. And here I would somehow take a different view of the interpretation of the creation of Eve. Because you see, it says in the second chapter of Genesis that it's not good that a man should be alone, that he should have a companion, a Nezer Kenegdo, a helpmate on his level. And though it doesn't say after that Eve is created, it then says you have to name the animals. But when he named the animals, he doesn't find anyone on his level. So a special act of creation is needed. And in and through that special act of creation, man himself acknowledges, you are bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, because you have come out of man. Namely, there's no way that you could say that a woman is less. So it reinforces what you have in the first chapter, the 26th verse that was noted this morning. The other thing I want to say, and this is really very important, the Bible, I think, for the Bible, equality does not refer primarily to those of equal rank, or those of the same class, or who have equal possession. Also, equality is more than justice in the sense of rectification of wrong. It is something positive, and it refers, now here's the point, to those who are weaker than oneself. The poor, the stranger, the widow, the orphan. So if equality, and in the very basis of equality, is the bringing up of those who are somehow less, the slave, it means bringing up or raising those who are vulnerable, disadvantaged, to the status of those who are secure. This is what I think is the biblical foundation for the very possibility of having any kind of change in the direction of equality. Now, in many instances, women made themselves vulnerable, but in doing so revealed the dignity and the righteousness inherent and often hidden in men. There was discussion this morning about the relationship of what actual women's roles have to do with the way men are. And here I think the story of Judah and Tamar is clear, where Judah acknowledges her superiority. It's clear in the story of Boaz and Ruth. I mean, Boaz could easily have taken advantage of Ruth, but no, he doesn't do that. He says, you're a righteous person. I'm going to treat you with dignity. Now, as times and the climate of opinion changed, the role and rights of women changed also. In contemporary Judaism, especially in the non-Orthodox branches, that is Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist Judaism, and as Rabbi Kalish carefully points out, even in some rare areas within modern Orthodox Judaism, women have been given the same status as men. These advancements emerged gradually, including, let me note them, mixed seating of men and women in the Conservative and Reform and Reconstructionists. And that's very important, that women now constitute a quorum for prayer. They constitute a minyan, right? Bat mitzvah, which is equivalent to bar mitzvah. Bat mitzvah is women, bar mitzvah is men. Women teaching in seminaries. And here again, my dear friend, Rabbi Judith Hauptman, was the first woman to receive a PhD in Talmud. She's an outstanding scholar. I have learned the world from her. And by the way, I think her command of rabbinic Judaism is absolutely trailblazing. But she sees things in the Talmud, at least that I never saw. I can tell you that. I mean, it's amazing. And I did study Talmud. It's not that I ignored it. This development culminated in the ordination of women as rabbis and cantors, as well as women becoming presidents of congregations, so that they now have been fully accepted into the religious life of these non-Orthodox branches of Judaism. These achievements were not easy and required courage, perseverance, and determination, and in many cases, discrimination and abuse. I can safely say that in the modern non-Orthodox branches of Judaism, full equality has been achieved. Now, let me now say where I am, I think very much with my dear friend Al-Hebri. I must, however, say that in my opinion, there have been excesses that have moved in an unhappy direction. Reconstructionist Rabbi Rebecca Alpert says, quote, the experience of praying with Sidur Nashim, the first Sabbath prayer book to refer God using female pronouns and imagery, transformed my relationship with God. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be made in God's image, to think of God as a woman like myself, to see her as both powerful and nurturing, to see her imaged with a woman's body. This was an experience of ultimate significance. Was this the relationship that men have had with God for all these millennia? Such appeals or references to a female deity and the body of a female deity is theologically regressive in Judaism, a kind of a return to paganism. Jewish monotheism teaches a concept of God that transcends sexuality, male or female. It is unfortunate also that women, to achieve their position in society, very often have had to mimic men. For example, when I was a rabbi in Pacific Palisades, I had a cantor who had a beautiful soprano voice, but always sang as a contralto, because she had been taught, by the way, at JTS, to sound more like a man. She says, if you sound like a man, you'll be accepted, okay? Now, most modern societies have realized that there are roles that women can pursue beyond the traditionally dictated wives and mothers, nurses and teachers, as well as rights that they can demand. In the Jewish religious sphere, women are moving in the direction that will enable them to become role models, where in the past only men have held those positions. As women achieve scholarship in Jewish sources, they will attain decision-making positions in which they not only teach Judaism, but they will write responsa. They will write and define and therefore affect the practice of Judaism for both men and women. Women will not merely write about women's issues, but as the case of Rabbi Hauptman, root out and highlight rabbinic texts that were very favorable to women and that former generations have perhaps deliberately ignored. The time has come when women's studies, when pursued with the goal of objectivity and authority, will reveal much about the proper history of Judaism, the proper significance of Jewish beliefs and teachings, and a perspective that may have been lost during the period of male dominance.